Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
So we are going to be studying this morning in the book of Numbers, of course. We're continuing in the book of Numbers. And we're going to look at, last time we studied this text together, this parsha, Beha'alotecha. We studied the episode of complaining in the desert. And we talked about it from Ilana Pardes's work about the biography of ancient Israel, where she imagines Israel as a character, as a fictional character, and what that character goes through. And that we talked about the birth being at the Exodus, coming through the birth waters, right? All of that stuff. And then we talked about the desert experience being the experience of weaning. So all of the emotions that go along with weaning for an infant. So the satisfaction of the breast, and then the rage when the breast is taken away. All of that kind of powerlessness that the infant feels, and therefore all the rage that comes with that, and the resistance, and the lack of control, and the mom kind of having the nerve to separate at all, and just all of the complicated stuff that goes along with that. So that's what we looked at last year when we looked at this idea of the Israelites complaining in the desert. So I want to look at it again this year, that same text, but I want to look at it a little differently, always, of course. But I want to focus on one part that, me, I like to bring you what I never saw before, that like when I start reading commentary and go, whoa, okay, I never saw that. And so we're going to do that with one part of the text. So let's look first, of course, at the text itself. We're going to be in the book of Numbers, chapter 10, we're going to start at, verse 33. Thank you, Lisa. What would I do without Lisa? So do you know, the rabbis, when they would learn with children, they would learn Talmud with children. Talmud is this huge page, this very, very big page. You've seen a book of Talmud. Some of you, it's like really big. So for a kid to learn all that text on that page and be able to like prove to the teacher that they know it is a huge accomplishment for young kids. So the rabbis would take something very, 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 very precious and very expensive, which was honey, and they would put it on the corner of the page of Talmud. And once the student learned that daf, that page of Talmud, they got to lick the honey off the page. So that Torah learning should be sweet, and it should be associated with sweetness. And so that's why we have muffins at Torah study for those of us who are in the room. Okay. So we're dealing with the Israelites, right? We've gotten a lot has gone on, and Moshe goes to his father-in-law and says, "Why don't you stay with us? God will be gracious to you." And we don't get told why, but what we get told is he says, "No, thank you." His father-in-law here is called Chovav ben Reuel from Midian. So a different tradition of a different name for Moshe's father-in-law, not Yitro. He's not called Jethro here. He's called Chovav. All right. So he's going to go back to Midian. He's going to go back to his native land. Moshe begs him, please don't leave us. Like, you're a guy who knows a lot. You have a lot of connections out here in the desert. And he says, well, sorry, that's not going to happen. All right. So we're going to pick up at 33. Vaisu mehar Adonai derech shloshet yamim va'aron brit Adonai nosea lifneim derech shloshet yamim lator lahem nucha. So they set out from mehar Adonai. Notice this pairing of words. Mehar, from the mountain of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. We don't get Sinai called that other places. It is very rare for Sinai to be called Har Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. So they set out Mehar Adonai, from the mountain of God, 3 days journey, and the ark of the covenant of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh traveled before them by 3 days to seek out a place for them to rest, meaning for them to make camp. And the cloud of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh was over them, when they would go from the camp. And you all should know this. You could probably sing, many of you, this verse. Vayehi binsoah ha'aron vayomer Moshe kuma Adonai ve'afutzu oivecha ve'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. How do we know how to sing that? Those of us who are singing that. This is part of the Torah service. The rabbis put this piece of Torah to begin the Torah service. It was when the ark would set out and Moshe would say, Kuma Adonai, get up, rise up, Adonai, ve'yafutzu oivecha, and scatter your enemies, and have those who hate you flee from before you. And when it stopped, Moshe would say, Shuva Adonai, return, O God, you who are Israel's myriad of thousands. Okay, why did I start at 33? You'll see. All right, but remember, that's where I started. I started at when they set out from the mountain of Yud-He Vav-He, because that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time, believe it or not. All right. So this is where usually we understand the whole complaining business to start. How? Vayhi ha'am kimit onanim. And the people were as complainers. Ke means as, like. So the people were like complainers. Ra be'oznei Adonai. This was bad in the ears of God. And God heard, meaning they're complaining. Vayichar apo, and God's nostrils flared. That is always a very, very bad thing. When God's nostrils flared, this is a euphemism for getting angry. Bativ arbam, right? And God was like incensed with them. And bativ arbam ish, and a fire broke out against them. V'tochal biketze hamachane, and it started to eat, to consume the edges of the camp. All right. What are they complaining about? Trick question. We don't know. We don't know. It's kind of odd. The nation became as complainers, and it was evil in the ears of God, and God heard, and God got angry. So they're obviously actually complaining. What are they complaining about? We don't know. It's very odd that we get this whole business. God is super angry. God causes a fire to break out, and we're not even told what the people are complaining about. All right. Now we get Vayitzak ha'am el Moshe v'yitpalel Moshe el Adonai v'tishka'a ha'esh. So the people cry out as usual, right? Fire starts in the desert. That is a very, very bad thing, right? Most everything they have is flammable, including their flocks and their children, right? So it's like, this is a bad thing. So what do? Of course, they cry out to Moses, and Moshe prays on their behalf, and the fire dies down. So Moshe is the intermediary, but it's bad enough that Moshe has to intercede on their behalf. And the place was called Tav'era, because that's where the fire va'ara bam, it broke out against them. All right. So now they left the mountain of God. They are complaining about something, we don't know what. Now we get a very specific incident, beginning at verse 4. The asafsuf, the riffraff that was in their midst, literally in Hebrew, craved a craving. So verse 4, hit avu ta'ava. They craved a craving. In the language of Zornberg, they desired a desire. Vayashuvu, vayivku gam b'nei Yisrael, vayomru mi yachilenu basar. And so they craved a craving, and they wept, and they said, mi yachilenu basar, who will feed us flesh? Who will feed us meat? We remember the fish that we used to eat for free in Egypt, right? It was free. What was the cost? Only, their freedom. Only their freedom. And the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. Now our gullets are shriveled. There is nothing at all. Nothing but what? Oh, yeah, the miraculous man that God causes to fall every day and 2 portions on Friday, so they'll have enough for Shabbos. But yeah, that's all they have to eat is this miraculous food that gives them all of the nutrients that they need. That's all they have. Their gullets are shriveled. Now we have a note from the editor. The Haman and the manna was like coriander seed, and in color it was like bdellium. So now we're clear. We're very clear what man was like. Now we all have a very clear picture. And the people would go and gather it and grind it between millstones or pound it in a mortar, boil it in a pot and make it into cakes. It tasted like rich cream. When the dew fell on the camp at night, the manna would fall upon it. So this is all the editor's note, meaning manna was a yummy thing. You could do lots of different kinds of things with it, and it tasted like rich cream. So what are they fetching about? Right? This is according to the parenthetical notes that we get here. All right. Some want to say this dew business is about what manna actually refers to, a phenomenon in the desert where there's a certain kind of sap that falls from trees that is very high in carbohydrates and is sweet and fills a lot of actual nutritional need. So that's how some people survive in a desert climate, but we're not doing that today. All right. Moses heard the people, bocheh, crying, weeping, lemishpachotav, each one to their mishpacha, their clan. Remember how we had them designated by mishpacha, by clan? Well, now we're getting that was their designation. That's how they were supposed to camp. That's how they were supposed to live together. And what do? Now they weep and gnash their teeth, right? And geshrai by clan at the entrance of each tent. God was very angry. Vayichar af Adonai me'od. God's nostrils flared a lot. And uve'enei Moshe ra. And in the eyes of Moshe, this was bad. So we've gotten ra twice. God hears, and for God hearing, it's ra. It's bad. Moshe sees what's happening, and for Moshe, what he sees is ra, is evil, is bad. Vayomer Moshe el Adonai, and Moshe says to God, why have you dealt with your servant this way? And why have I not enjoyed your favor that you have laid the burden of this people on me? I totally get it. Just kidding. Did I birth this people? Right? Did I birth them that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a caregiver carries an infant to the land that you promised on oath to their ancestors? What meat to give all this people when they whine before me and say, give us meat to eat? I cannot carry this people by myself. It is too much. If you would deal thus with me, kill me rather, I beg you, and let me see no more of my ra. Third time we get ra, right? Let me no longer see my yuckiness, right? It's translated here wretchedness, but it's using the same word, ra, like this is horrible for Moshe. Then God said to Moshe, gather for me 70 elders of whom you have experience as elders and officers of the people, and bring them to the tent of meeting and let them take their place there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will draw upon the spirit that is on you and put it upon them. They shall share the burden of the people with you. You shall not bear it alone. We do know there were 70, right? There was this council of elders that was also involved in legislating for ancient Israel. And say to the people, purify yourselves, for tomorrow you shall eat meat. For you have kept whining before Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and saying, if only we had meat to eat. Indeed, we were better off in Egypt. Adonai will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall eat not 1 day, not 2, not even 5 days or 10 or 20, but a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you. For you have rejected Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, who was among you, by whining before God and saying, oh, why did we ever leave Egypt? But Moses said, the people who are with me number 600,000, yet in terms of soldiers, yet you say, I will give them enough meat for a whole month. Okay. Would you say that to the Eternal? Wait a minute. You're going to give them meat for a whole month. Have you seen how many people there are over here? Okay. Could enough flocks and herds be slaughtered to suffice them? Or could all the fish in the sea be gathered for them to suffice them? And God answered Moses, is there a limit to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's power? You shall soon see whether what I have said happens to you or not. Moses went out and reported the words of God to the people. He gathered 70 of the people's elders and stationed them around the tent. Then after coming down in a cloud and speaking to him, God drew upon the spirit that was upon him and put it upon the 70 participating elders. And when the spirit rested upon them, they spoke in ecstasy. So this is where it comes from, people. One of the places it comes from in the Christian tradition is from this, right? Speaking in, right? The ruach, the spirit rests on them. And when the spirit rests on them, they speak in ecstasy. Two of the participants, one named Eldad and the other Medad, had remained in camp, yet the spirit rested upon them. So they were not with the 70 elders, right? God said, bring me 70 elders and I'll take from off of you some ruach and put it on them. Eldad and Medad stayed in the camp, and yet the ruach was on them, and they were among those recorded, and they spoke in ecstasy in the camp. An assistant ran out to Moses and said, Eldad and Medad are acting the prophet in the camp. And Joshua, son of Nun, Moshe's attendant from his youth, spoke up and said, my Lord Moses, restrain them. But Moses said to him, are you wrought up on my account? Would that all God's people were prophets, that God put the divine spirit on all of them. Moses then re-entered the camp together with the elders of Israel. And now we get the incident with the God sweeps up a wind and quail from the sea and strews them over the camp. And the people eat meat. And then the meat was still between their teeth, not yet chewed, when the anger of God blazed forth against the people, and God struck the people with a very severe plague, and everybody who'd been involved in the complaining about the meat business got dead. Okay. We are very clear about that story. We are very clear what they're complaining about. We are very clear that Moses has had it. Moses is absolutely reaching his breaking point. Moshe, at this point, I would say, is a classic case of burnout, right? Kill me now. Kill me now. I cannot handle the burden of this people. I can't do it. And so that God seems to address with some rahmanas. God seems to get that this people's a lot to deal with as leaders, right? So God answers that with a solution. God answers that with a plan. But what about the quail business? Now that is seen completely to be by God unreasonable, right? That is completely unreasonable. And so they are punished pretty severely. There is a season in the desert where quail come and land in massive numbers. They're exhausted. It's part of the flyover that they do for migration. And they land exhausted in Israel and are very easy to kill because they land en masse and they're completely exhausted. And so they are very easy to kill in large numbers. So this phenomenon does happen. So this doesn't come out of nowhere, right? This story. There is natural evidence for something like this. So it makes perfect sense. This is how it would be solved, right? Giving them meat. All right. Let's go back to Vayisu Mehar Adonai. So why did I start there? We understand that the people have sinned twice. Once complaining, and the other complaining about basar, complaining about meat and wanting to go back to Egypt, right? Longing for Egypt. We're going to hand out the source sheet. So we're going to start. So here's our verse. Vayisu Mehar Adonai derech shlosha yamim. So they leave the mountain of God, a distance of 3 days. So we're not sure why God's so angry. We can imagine God's kind of starting to be fed up with this people. See what I did there? Pardon the pun. God is fed up with this people. But the commentators want to say it's even worse than what we have here. It's even worse than what we see in the text as explicit. And so they're going to read into this verse, verse 33, that they left the mountain of God. So let's go to Ramban. No, sorry. This is the Talmud, Shabbat 116a. So that's on the back of your first page if you have a hard copy in front of you. So this is from the Babylonian Talmud, 116a. As it was taught in a Baraita, that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, in the future, this portion, which portion? This portion. They marched, right? They marched out. You see this nun here on the screen? That is a backwards, upside down nun. There's another one that's, I can't find it. It's not here in our text, but it's right before this. So these are brackets. These are a scribal tradition of a kind of parentheses. That you need to know that to understand the commentary. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, in the future, this portion will be uprooted from here where it appears and will be written in its proper place. Meaning those nuns are there to designate the part of the Torah that in time to come will be lifted out of there and moved to its proper place. Well, then why was it written here? Even though it discusses the travels of the people of Israel and the portion before it does not. So why? We just got the traveling a second ago. You wouldn't know that, but about blowing trumpets when they're supposed to move and how they're supposed to go. And when you blow this, they do this. And when you blow that, they do that. So why is this here? Why does this get dropped here that they journeyed out 3 days and the ark would go in front of them by 3 days? Why is that here? The Talmud is asking because it is in order to demarcate between the first punishable offense and the second punishable offense. What's the second punishable offense? That which appears immediately after. And the people complained wickedly in God's ears, right? And God becomes angry, blah, blah, blah. Well, if that's the second offense, what, asks the Talmud, is the first offense? Since we've said this nun, this traveling business comes to separate the first offense from the second offense. Well, we only get one. We get complaining. What's the offense before that? The offense before that is the verse, and they traveled from the mountain of God, Mehar Adonai, for 3 days. Okay, duh. Perfect explanation, right? Right? Makes total sense. Like, makes no sense at all. So now they have to explain it. So Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Chanina, said that they turned from after God. So don't read, remember I showed you those two words, Mehar Adonai, from the mountain of God. They misread on purpose those two words to say Me'achare Adonai. They turned not from the mountain of God, but they turned from following God and hurriedly fled Mount Sinai. The Gemara asks, and if so, where is the proper place for this paragraph? And Rav Ashi says in the portion where we were talking about the flags and the way people a few parshiot ago, the way with the flags and where they camp and blah, 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 that's where this text will go eventually. Okay. The only reason I bring this piece of the Talmud to you is to say the Talmud already is saying leaving the mountain of God was the first sin. There were 3. And when you get 3 in Jewish tradition, it's major, right? It's major. So that's how the Talmud, that's how the rabbis start to try to explain God being so angry. That by the time we get to the meat, it's the 3rd punishable offense of the people. The first being they left the mountain of God. So here, don't read they left the mountain of God. Read instead, they left Me'achare Adonai, from going after God. Okay. So now let's look at Ramban, Nachmanides. So Nachmanides starts at the bottom of yours, the complaining that we don't know what they were complaining about. That's the second. And the third is the complaining about meat. Because that second one gets resolved. They complain, we don't know why, and then a fire starts. Then Moshe intercedes and the fire dies down. Then we get a whole nother episode, right? Although some people want to say these are variant traditions of the same episode, but doesn't matter. The rabbis are reading, there's 2. Well, if God's that angry, there must be a 3rd. What's the 3rd? It's leaving the mountain. But I really loved some of what Zornberg had to say about this, so I want to unpack it. So Ramban, Nachmanides comes to say, and it came to pass when the ark set forward, right? So that was our verse, right? And it happened that they they set forward. God, the Eternal, made for this section, this verse and the following one, a special mark in front of it and behind it by placing two inverted letters nun at the beginning and the end of it. We just saw that. We just saw that scribal tradition. And it happens in every Torah scroll. You'll see it in every single Torah scroll. In order to indicate that this section's not in its proper place. Okay, Ramban knows this from Talmud. Nachmanides knows this from the Talmud. Why was it written here? In order to separate the narrative of one punishment and that of another punishment, right? Rashi agrees with this. So he's also quoting Rashi, our most famous commentator. Rashi agrees with this. But the rabbis did not explain to us what is this first punishment from which it is necessary to separate the latter verses, for there is no punishment mentioned here in scripture before the verse, and it came to pass when they left and the ark set out. The language of the Gemara, now he's going to quote what we read, I think. The second one is that they're complaining, they're murmuring, they're mitlo onanim. And Rabbi Hanina says, this teaches us that they turned aside from the eternal. Within 3 days of their journeying, the mixed multitude felt a lusting, complaining about the lack of meat in order to rebel against God. The meaning of this interpretation of the rabbis, that they set forward from the mount of the eternal, indicates a punishment, and that's based on what they found in the Agadah, so the Midrashic literature, that they set forward from Mount Sinai with joy, just like a child who runs away from school, saying, perhaps he will, meaning God, will give us more commandments if we stay. This then is the sense of the expression, and they set forward from the mount of the eternal, right? Har Adonai. They set out from Har Adonai, meaning that their intention was to remove themselves from there because it was the mountain of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. That's why they're leaving. It's because it's the mountain of God, right? So that is actually the first punishable offense. All right, let's look at Zornberg. So that's on now 5 of 8. Everything else was Talmud and Ramban. All right, so now we're looking at Aviva Zornberg. They traveled away from the mountain of God. Ramban, that we just looked at, Nachmanides, in the wake of his midrashic sources, which we saw, Talmud and Agadah, intuits an original act of abandonment, of betrayal. Perhaps because the text emphasizes that they are traveling from the mountain of God, the Talmud and the Yalkut detect a primal movement hidden from the naked eye, which initiates a process of alienation. At first, the people have no words to express this subtle beginning. The fact that the mountain of God with the tetragrammaton, what's the tetragrammaton? Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, right? Is never otherwise used to refer to Mount Sinai, right? So Har Adonai, Har of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is never used other than here. She's saying to designate Sinai. So why is it called that here? She's saying that Nachmanides and other sources intuit that it's called that because that's the reason the people are leaving it. Because it is associated so closely with Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, with revelation, with their intimacy with God. It's another midrashic source. So because it's never called that anywhere else, it lends the expression a metaphysical connotation, she says. It is the godliness rather than the mountain that they are fleeing. All right, so I want to stop there for a second. Okay, that's exactly what we're going to unpack. Why are they fleeing the mountain? Why is the Midrash and the Talmud calling this a sin? Why are they leaving? What's the sin in them leaving the mountain? They are leaving God. Okay, say more about that. They're leaving God. Listen, people, let me just explain. We know this microphone's not working, okay? We know it. We're working on it. We're trying to find another solution. We're looking into technology about what we can have on the thing that's going to pick up all the voice. So we are really trying, I promise. We're trying. But until then, talking to that, I'll repeat it if they don't hear it.
I said they left God.
And I said, say more. They left God, say more.
They were giving up. They were giving up.
They were giving up what?
On being a people in exile.
They were giving up being a people in exile. How?
They wish they were back in Egypt.
So that's later.
Mm-hmm.
What's the sin of leaving? the mountain, leaving God? What's happening there? Lack of trust and belief, Mark says. What did you want to say, George?
Would interpret it that they just got the Torah, or the Ten Commandments, and now they're out. It's a good thing, and they are now going to go live elsewhere.
They got the Torah, they got the Ten Commandments. That's good. They're going to go live elsewhere. But the tradition sees it as a sin.
Yes, I understand.
What's the sin?
I don't know.
I don't know, George says. Okay. Turning your back to God. Okay. So from the Midrashic tradition, from what we just read, it was just mapped out for us, but we have to unpack it. I get that. Are they not keeping their promise to God? What promise, Deborah? Unmute and tell us, what promise are they breaking?
Well, when they were leaving, that was a part of the whole process of leaving Egypt, is that they were going to, they sought protection, and Moses was going to be their leader. And the expectation was that then they would be, the people who would maintain and be true to their covenant to God, to carry out the, a different way of living that would be more true to being, of the people and looking out for each other and maintaining those spiritual practices and traditions that they were trying to.
So George says that's what they're doing.
Right.
They're leaving the mountain to go do that. They can't do that in the desert. They got to go. They're on their way to Israel to implement exactly that.
Supposed to be, you don't just wait and do it when you get there. You incorporate that and begin living it and putting it into practice.
So you're suggesting that leaving the mountain of God says they're not doing what they were supposed to do in getting Torah, that they're not observing those laws, right? We don't have any evidence that they're not doing it. Then they start complaining. So I know the complaining is a problem, but part of us has to ask why. What does the tradition see as the first sin? Why is this such a problem that it says they leave Har Adonai? Were they lazy? Mm-hmm. Were they lazy? Lee asks. Victoria, what do you want to say?
One word: separation. The core of not belonging, leaving. It's like, wow, what a statement to God.
We're out of here.
Yeah, just separation. Really a sin. Ooh, it is.
Okay, so Victoria is saying ours is a communitarian tradition. And the communitarian aspects of our tradition are utmost. So by the people separating, by them leaving, they're already somehow, is what I hear you saying, Victoria, are somehow working against that, right? Against that. Maybe the simple answer is that Jews kvetch. That we're not talking about the kvetching yet. That's the third sin. That's the second and third sin. I'm still on the first sin, right? Yes, they kvetch. That's terrible. We know that. They get punished for that massively. I'm talking about how is leaving the mountain of God a problem? And Melinda, speak.
Just spitballing here, but like if you give somebody a book as a gift that's a really good book to you and you really want them to read it and they're like, oh, thanks. And 6 months later, like, did you read that book? And they're like, oh, it's still on my shelf. Is it that they left instead of like sitting down and reading Torah?
Beautiful, Melinda, beautiful. I think this is exactly what the tradition is saying when they say they left gleefully, like a kid getting out of school. If we don't leave this mountain where we encountered God and learned about the right way to live, we may get some more stuff we're supposed to do. Let's hightail it out of here. Let's go to recess. Let's go to the monkey bars. I do not want another math assignment. Thank you very much. This is where the Midrash finds the beginning of the sinfulness that ends up in a pretty horrible, in-your-face insult to God. We want to go back to Egypt. It begins here. It begins with the movement away from obligation. It begins with a movement trying to escape the responsibilities of what it means to be an Am Kadosh, what it means to be a holy and responsible people. I was talking to my Chavruta partner who could not exactly figure out why I was so excited about this text. And I said, because isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? We say we want to be good people. We say we want to be responsible. We say we want to be mature. We say we want to be enlightened. You know what? No, we don't. I mean, we do, but then we run all the time from what it actually means to actually sit down and actually participate in building that kind of a community, in building that kind of a society. We'd rather binge on Netflix. And we know it's true. This is human nature. We say we want a deep religious experience and a deep spiritual life. How often do we sit in meditation to actually experience a little sense of more intimacy with the divinity that sits within us and beyond us? How often do we come to prayer as a community to actually experience the community being closer to the divine, both within and beyond us? Not so often, liberal Jews, and I include myself. I have to, because that's how I get a paycheck. I went into this career because I suspected this of myself, that if I didn't do it for a paycheck, guess what? I'd be binging Netflix. It is part of the reason I became a rabbi. And I think this is the instinct the Midrashic tradition has about human nature. We say we are so privileged to have received Torah at Sinai. They couldn't wait to get out of there. Right, says the tradition. They were like, okay, enough with the contact, enough with the intimacy, enough with, right, deep spiritual revelations that are going to mean we have to change who we are and how we operate and how we do things. Okay, Mark?
It seems to me that going along with Zornberg's notion of a biography of Israel, this whole situation, I think, is a very interesting symbolic representation of the whole fundamental process of the very beginnings of ego development, of the separation from the mother and the tremendous ambivalence and difficulty, the aggression that has to be mobilized and so on, and the seeking of another object, the seeking essentially of a father, and the ease with which any frustration in the seeking of a second object leads back to a regression to a merger with mother. And et cetera. But I think that much of it has to do with the symbolic representation of that. And I don't want to go on endlessly about the specific details of it, but I think that it has to do with the struggles to leave Mother Egypt and become separated from Mother objects and to attach to an external object or a second object, in this case, God and the Torah, the giving of the commandments, etc., as a second object, and in this sense, in Zornberg's sense, a kind of representation of the movement from merger with mother to the beginnings of ego development and the ability, which is always and endlessly ambivalent, to attach to an object outside of the omnipotent provision of mother.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. And we're glad you're back. So last year we studied that with Pardes, Ilana Pardes, this whole idea of the biography of Israel, and that this is the moment, right? And I think if we take it further for all of us, that, and I know you would agree, I think that always happens for us. That continues to happen for us the rest of our lives. How do we have the strength and the commitment and the discipline in order to order our lives around an object that we think is loftier than just our own hanging out with mom, right? And on the one hand, you would think union with God would address that. But it seems the Midrashic tradition understands it's not true, because union with God actually demands that we grow up, that we take responsibility, that we make hard choices and hard decisions and have to do the hard work of adulting and of running a society and running a responsible community and running a responsible household where our children are taught the right values, where we don't yell at them, even though we really, really, really want to. This is what it means to adult. And that's not easy and it's not fun. However lovely union is, when it comes with demands about being true individuals responsible for ourselves and the community we build, we don't love it so much. Right. I want to look, I'll close out after this. I just want to look at one more piece because I think here, the Emek Davar that Zorenberg's going to quote now takes it to another level. An intriguing alternative to this interpretation, meaning they're fleeing because they don't want more homework, right? Like a kid running from school. We don't want to stay because maybe we'll get more work. An intriguing alternative to this interpretation is offered by Ha'emek Davar. Their intention, he writes, was to turn aside from the delight, the oneg, that was there at Mount Sinai with God. So they sought to indulge in delights in oneg of the flesh, basar, flesh. On this view, the people exchanged the spiritual ecstasy of Sinai for the physical pleasures of basar, meat or flesh. Their desire for basar begins immediately on leaving Sinai, even though they never express it in words until after they, quote, complain over these forced marches. So that when they return to weeping, which we saw in our text, because that word was there in Hebrew, return to weeping, it's like when did we see them weeping before, right? The Hebrew suggests they've done this before. In the desire episode, they are reverting to an earlier repressed desire, turning aside from a fascination with God. Again, this purposeful misreading, me'acharei Adonai, right, from following God, meaning from being totally fascinated with God. They obey an impulse to flee from the intensity of Sinai to the simpler pleasures of the flesh. It is a turning aside, an aversion from one source of bliss and its substitution by another. And so we're going to get, I just brought you some other texts on the fact that they early on, like Rashi says, mitonanim, complaining is a pretext of how to separate themselves from following God. And then we have this business about craving meat. Rashi says, who will feed us meat? Did they not have flesh? It already says they came up with flocks and herds. They had meat. So that's ridiculous. How come they're complaining they don't have meat? They had all these flocks and herds. If you say they'd already eaten them, like they were gone, Rashi says, but it is not stated at a later period when they were about to enter the land. Now the children of Reuben had cattle in very great multitude, right? It turns out, says he, they were only seeking a pretext. To understand more closely the oneg experience of Mount Sinai, I suggest that we invoke Jacques Lassan's term, jouissance, bliss, joy, ecstasy. Lassan writes of jouissance as primordial, infinite desire. Hang with me. Particular desires, on the other hand, act as paths, filters, blindings for jouissance, but also as defenses against it. This is so amazing. Desire is a defense, a prohibition against going beyond a certain level in jouissance. Unbounded jouissance is annihilating, a fire that threatens to obliterate the self. Desires are bounded by law. The dialectical tension between law and desire thus makes it possible for us to live with some openness to the jouissance that is our deepest wish. Right? Y'all are looking at me like I'm crazy. All right. What is she saying? She quotes the psychoanalyst, I think that's what he is, Lacan, and says, jouissance is a desire that is so big and so infinite that it terrifies us. And that's the kind of oneg they had at Sinai. It opened up their understanding of the capacity to desire infinitely And that was terrifying. So they go back to a small desire for Haagen-Dazs because that is not terrifying. That is bounded. You can go to the store if you have enough money, because it's a lot. You can buy Haagen-Dazs, and then you sit and you eat it, and you can only eat a certain amount before your desire is sated. It's got limits. It's bounded. Jouissance is not, and therefore it is terrifying. And that, says Lacan, that Zornberg's bringing to answer Rashi, to say, yes, Rashi's right. Now we have more modern language for it, but Rashi's got it. It's that they had jouissance. They got a sense of jouissance at the mountain, and they could not tolerate that. That amount of desire for something, just that open desire that we all have underneath everything we do and say and are about. They're underneath that, I think. You'd have to, Siegel, you and Fish and other people are going to have to help me here. But my sense is that is an underlying reality for us, that there is just this boundless desire, and you can't even fill in the blank. For what? For connection, to be seen, to be known, to not be alone, to not be separate, to just tap into the joy of the universe. It's there all the time, and it's terrifying because it is insatiable. Gevura. So, right, boundedness, being part of the Kabbalistic tradition, is because I think on some level, yes, but I think on another level, Gevura is the problem here. They want Gevura. They want limits. And so they cut off their access to what really is the only thing that can answer true jouissance, which is the divine. The divine is enough to fill us, I think, I'm going to make that argument. I'm not going to say anyone else is making that argument. I'm making the argument from all of these texts that I think what they're hinting at is that God is the only thing that can truly fill us when it comes to jouissance. That sense of when we finally hit it in meditation once every now and then, that feeling of connectedness to everything, that feeling that we're not just floating out here, that we are actually part of everything. Like when those experiences happen, whether it's when we're singing ecstatically, if you're lost in painting something, with those moments of flow, those moments where it's just overwhelmingly evident that, oh my God, I'm full. That's what happens at Sinai. And they can't stand it. Right? They can't handle it. They want to go back to craving a craving. They want to crave something limited. They want to crave some glasses that when they put them on, okay, everything's fixed, right? Bounded, limited, because actually being in touch with jouissance is just too overwhelming and too terrifying. And so they want to crave meat. They don't actually crave meat. They crave a craving. They want to crave a specific thing because that can be filled. They're terrified of their longing that is unbounded. And I think that drives so much of our crazy behavior. I think this is exactly true. If we binge on Netflix, we can get a hit and we're satisfied. Then we get, I can maybe start the other episode. What time is it? And I know in an hour, I'm going to be satisfied. Well, they usually leave you hanging, but you've watched another hour of the episode, right? That's manageable. Jouissance is overwhelming. Mark is wondering if this is what related to a portal to the Zohar. In what way? Reconnecting with primal blessing. So I think the Zohar is answering this same need that we just talked about, right? That the Zohar is about how do we open to the oneg of Sinai. What the rabbis are talking about are the ways we don't want to open to the oneg of Sinai, right? Because it scares the crap out of us to be in touch with that kind of longing, that kind of unbounded desire. And I think there's something so deep and so wise here. And I think this is the thing. This is the reason I got my chavruta. I told her, this is why I want to bring this text, because I think this is the major problem of our time. People don't want, from the first explanation, people don't want anymore to do what we have to do to build a society that's not going to be the ugly one we have right now, right? People are not ready to do the work. We're not ready to show up and have hard conversations. We're not. I include myself in that. I'm not looking at anybody in particular. We aren't ready to do it. We're tired. We want the pleasures of the flesh. We want to sit on the couch and we want to watch television and order things on Amazon that'll come in 48 hours. There was a comedian who says, crime, that's so yesterday. I want a company that's going to anticipate what I want and send it to me 2 days before I know I want it. It's not untrue, right? That's what we want. We want our desires fulfilled before we even know we have it. 48 hours. We expect any desire we have to be fulfilled. I think it is a very dangerous time we're living in, that we are fleeing from Sinai. We are fleeing Mehar Adonai, Me'achare Adonai. We are fleeing from the responsibilities that we know we have to build a just, equitable, fair, decent society. It's just too much work for us. We don't want to have to do it. We don't want to have to be on the PTA. We don't want to have to show up at, the Shriners. We don't want to show up at Rotary anymore. Those organizations, by the way, have been decimated in our time. Those mid-section civil ways of engaging, and I don't mean engaging civilly, I mean civic engagement, that's gone. It's gone. We're not showing up anymore. We want to zoom in. Okay, maybe I'll attend. Maybe I won't. Hopefully it's recorded. And we wonder why it's going to hell in a handbasket out there. I think this teaching is timeless. And I think it's particularly poignant right now that we are turning to basar. We are turning to the pleasures of that we can manage, that we can access. And we are fleeing from what it would mean to engage in ways that would bring us to doing exactly what everyone has said about implementing Torah to build a kind of society that Torah demands, that we try at least and create. What's the way out of it? I don't know. But this is a start. Being together like this, digging in, I believe is a start. I believe everything we do in this building is a start. Watching those kids in there, I have to say, it's a start, right? We're hopefully raising up a generation where these values will be implemented differently than they are right by the grown-ups in the room right now.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.